I take this opportunity to welcome again everybody, to remind that these events, the Phi Talks, are co-organized by is a Phi-Lab together with Pi School. And in the last months, we organized more, I think, than 15, 16 Phi Talks, almost twice per month. After this talk, there will be another one in July. Then we will have a short break for August and be back in September. So check to follow us on social media and on the website, and you will see future events. So thank you to everybody again, and I would say we can start.
So I'll briefly say two sentences too. Thank you, Cristiano. So thank you everyone for joining. We have here Siddharth Singh and Thomas Spencer. I'm sorry if I mispronounced, from the International Energy Agency, who were brought into contact to us by Quentin, a former research fellow in Phi-Lab, because I think they collaborated on some issues relating to AI and energy and the future of that. So we are very curious to hear what Sid and Thomas will present about AI and energy and how they are related. So I will leave the word to you. Go ahead. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ruben, and thank you, Cristiano. We are, of course, very pleased to be here. We have worked very closely with Conta and in general have tried our best to leverage on this new field of work for us, which is Earth observation, and of course also artificial intelligence. AI itself is a very new field in the sense that the intersection of AI with energy has become a major issue only in the last maybe 2 or 3 years, to the extent that it has. And here at the agency, we work towards understanding this linkage, this nexus. And of course, for those who may not be aware, our agency is an international organization, and we work with our member countries, which represent about 80% of the world energy demand. So we help governments, regulators, and of course the industry more broadly understand the contours of this new vector or this new challenge to the energy sector. So with that, I'll pass it on to my colleague Thomas, and Thomas will run us through some of the slides. I'll come in later at the end, and then we shall, of course, try to also see how we've been using Earth observation along with AI to better understand this nexus between AI and energy in the first place. So Thomas, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Sid, and good afternoon to everyone also from my side. Thanks very much for the invitation, but thanks also for the loan of Quentin. A lot of the work that you're going to see in the presentation was actually done by him, leveraging Earth observation for insights into some of the more, let's say, obscure energy trends, which are nonetheless important, and we'll talk about that. So Sid and I are going to present about 12 slides. I think it should take about 20 minutes or so, and then I'm sure there'll be time for questions if you have any questions. And as Sid mentioned, we'll talk about energy and AI, but we will also talk a little bit about how we have tried to use Earth observation to understand some of the emerging questions in energy and AI and in the energy sector more broadly. So in this opening slide, I just wanted to do a bit of a scene setter to try and convey the speed of developments in the artificial intelligence sector and how that is impacting on the energy sector. So the clearest vector for the impact of AI on the energy sector today is the electricity demand of data centers. So large models like ChatGPT and so on need to be trained and run on data centers. And as you can see on the screen, investment in data centers has been growing extremely rapidly in the last few years. In 2025, it crossed $400 billion. And in 2026, 5 companies, the 5 largest hyperscalers globally, have announced a 70% increase in their capital expenditure, largely on data centers, which will take it across $700 billion US dollars. And if we sort of try and put this in perspective for how much this investment is relative to, other large sources of investment in the energy sector, I think it helps to give us a sense of the scale and the magnitude of what is happening. Global oil and gas production, this is by all companies across the entire planet, is slightly more than 600 billion US dollars per year. So we are talking about 5 companies spending more in 2026 on data centers than the entire global oil and gas industry does on upstream production. That's an industry that has been in development for 150 years, of course. Part of this investment is being driven by, booming demand that is already here. And so we are hearing, of capacity constraints within data centers, of Google, Microsoft curtailing users of their models because they are facing constraints on capacity. It's a bit difficult to understand, what is the global demand for artificial intelligence. There's no sort of global statistics on token consumption, but we can get some sense of the scale of the growth by looking at open source platforms like Open Router, where we have a 6-fold increase in token consumption in the space of 12 months. When we use the IEA's cutting-edge data to understand what this means for the energy sector, we can see that this is leading to very rapid growth in electricity consumption from data centers. Our statistics show a 17% increase in the electricity consumption of data centers last year. I think it's important to put that in perspective, however. Electricity consumption is growing rapidly around the world for multiple reasons as countries in the developing world industrialize, urbanize, and start to acquire more energy-intensive goods like air conditioning. But also even in the developed world, we have electrification of end users like transport. We have a return to industrial growth and the trend of data center electricity consumption. So to put this 17% growth in perspective, at the global level, electricity consumption grew about 800 terawatt hours. We estimate that data center consumption grew about 60 terawatt hours. So that translates into data centers still being only 10% of the global growth in power consumption last year. This raises the question, of course, of how do we see things going forward? I showed you on the previous slide the capital expenditure, which is in a way locking in growth in data centers for the next few years. But there are also constraints on how fast that growth can occur. Across the energy sector, we see constraints that are limiting the rate of growth in data centers from equipment supply chains. For example, gas turbines and transformers, which are needed to connect data centers to electricity networks, are sold out for the next 3 years in the case of transformers, the next 4 to 5 years in the case of gas turbines. If we look at infrastructure constraints, in many of our economies, our networks are congested, and the connection queue to get a grid connection can take several years to resolve. So even a data center project that is applying for a grid connection now may only be connected after 2030. And then if we look at the constraints on building new transmission lines to resolve grid congestion, transmission lines in advanced economies can take anything up to 4 to 8 years to build. So that is also posing a constraint on how quickly data centers can be built out. And then, of course, within the IT supply chain, we just don't have enough manufacturing capacity to build the advanced chips that are needed to go into AI-focused data centers. So memory, for example, high bandwidth memory is sold out for the next 3 to 4 years, and that's also a binding constraint on how quickly things can be built. This means that when we project going forward, we actually see a relatively narrow uncertainty band out to 2030, locked in on investments, limits the downside, and these constraints limit the upside. But the uncertainty band is much wider when we go out to 2035 and beyond. And here it's really fundamental questions around what is the rate of uptake of AI? How good does the technology get? How economically useful does it become? How is it monetized? And fundamental technology questions related to how quickly efficiency improvements keep going on both the hardware and the software side. So the range of uncertainty faced by the energy sector is really quite unprecedented here. So in our projections, which you just saw, data center electricity consumption doubles between now and 2030, but it still only accounts for about 3% of global power demand. So you might ask yourselves, what is all the fuss about? Why are we hearing so much about data centers today? It would seem that they are set to consume all of the global energy consumption in the next few years. Our data shows that this is very clearly not the case, but this does not mean that data centers don't create challenges for the energy system. Data centers have three unusual characteristics which make them challenging infrastructure to integrate into our electricity networks. The first is that they tend to cluster much closer to urban areas than other energy-intensive infrastructure. So here's an example of Earth observation that we have leveraged. This is not a stylized representation. It is real data based on GIS analysis of the about 10,000 data centers in operation around the world and comparing them with other energy-intensive infrastructure like factories, steel plants, and so on. And you can see that they tend to cluster much closer to urban areas. They tend to cluster much closer to sources of final demand. But that also means that they tend to cluster close to areas where grids are already under strain, because urban areas are large sources of power demand. The other unusual characteristic of data centers is that they tend to be spatially concentrated. And again, this is based on GIS analysis of data centers in operation today. So if we look at major clusters of data centers in Europe, for example, 20% of the electricity consumption of the country of Ireland comes from data centers. There's a huge cluster in Ireland. In the United States, 30% of the electricity consumption of Virginia comes from data centers. Again, there's a huge cluster of data centers. So in these jurisdictions where data centers are clustering together, they represent large loads that are putting pressure on electricity networks due to the fact that there are many of them in a single place. And the third characteristic of data centers is that they are getting bigger and they can be developed relatively quickly. So a large hyperscale data center today may have a power draw of about 100 megawatts. The largest under construction has a power draw of about 2 gigawatts, so 2,000 megawatts. That's equivalent to the power consumption of 2 million households, or to put it in perspective against a large industrial consumer like an aluminium smelter might have a power draw of 750 megawatts. So we are talking about industrial scale infrastructure that is serving the digital economy. The largest announced data center would have a power draw of 5 gigawatts. We're starting to talk about the power draw of a small town, a small city. Small in the global sense, not in the European sense. So data centers are getting bigger and bigger, but they can also be developed relatively quickly. And Sid will show you some very nice data that we have on the speed of development that we have used Earth observation to put together. So I won't say more about that. But these three factors together, the fact of clustering close to cities, spatial clustering close together, and this growing size and speed of development, means that data centers, despite representing still a relatively small share of global electricity consumption, are putting quite some pressure on electricity systems in the places where they are being developed aggressively. So the numbers that I presented previously were for global electricity consumption from data centers. But of course, data centers are serving many different end users. They're serving cloud hosting, they're serving web streaming, financial services, and so on. So we find it useful to break up data centers further into conventional data centers and what we call AI-focused data centers. So AI-focused data centers are ones that have specialist hardware in them, graphics processing units, tensor processing units, and other specialized chips and servers that are focused on training and running AI models. So even the conventional data centers, we see power demand growing by 40%. And this is just a testament to the fact that the economy is growing more and more digitalized today. But AI optimized data centers are set to increase their power demand by a factor of 3 in the space of 5 years between now and 2030. And it's really these AI optimized data centers with very power intensive equipment that are driving the growth that we see in our projections. This is also putting strains on electrical engineering of these data centers and also the equipment supply chains. They are starting to have inside them under operation extremely specialized servers with really quite unusual power demand characteristics, which is putting under pressure, the electrical technologies that we have available today to supply these data centers, the cooling technologies that we have available today. Let me give you just a few examples. So on the screen, you can see a data center rack drawn roughly to scale. The next generation of AI data center racks being developed by NVIDIA and others could weigh as much as 3 tons. So that is just an indicator of how much cooling and power equipment and compute equipment is being packed into this small space. They could have a power density, so this is measured in kilowatt per rack, of up to 600 kilowatts per rack. That's as much as the power draw of 65 houses, packed into this small space, needing electrical equipment to deliver extremely finely controlled voltages down to this level. What we are also seeing is, an increase in power density means an increase in heat density, because ultimately power consumption is converted to heat. So the next generation of AI data centers could need to extract as much heat as is generated by 30 gas boilers that we might have in our homes to heat our homes in Europe per rack. Imagine extracting the heat generated by 30 gas boilers from a rack of this size. That's a huge, cooling challenge that the next generation needs to meet. And then, on the other hand, we're used to thinking of data centers as a relatively flat electrical load, but that's not really true with AI. We know that these networked GPUs go through very sharp swings in their compute cycles as they, run a heavy cycle of compute, then cache a result, save it to memory, write it back, run another cycle of compute. And that means as the power density of these network GPU clusters increases, the magnitude of these compute cycles increases as well. And therefore, the variability of the power demand of the racks like this is increasing as well. And that means that these data centers need things like electricity storage in different forms, capacitors, battery storage, to smooth the power demand at the rack level and at the facility level, to be able to integrate, smoothly with the electricity grid and with the power operation characteristics of the equipment in the data center. So I'll hand back to Sid, who's going to walk you through the final few slides.
Thanks very much, Thomas. As Thomas presented in the previous slide, these AI data centers, or as we like to call them, AI factories, present new types of challenges to the electricity system or to the energy system as a whole. As he mentioned, they are packed with these racks that consume a lot of electricity and come with a lot of other technical requirements that make them quite unique to the electricity system. So we wanted to focus down and drill down on these types of AI factories or these AI specialized data centers. So Thomas had previously presented a geospatial analysis of all the 10 to 11,000 commercial data centers that exist globally. In this slide, we'd like to drill down on about 21 upcoming new data centers in the United States. These 21 data centers are AI focused, they're extremely large in terms of their capacity. We wanted to understand if these are also coming up close to cities or if there's been geographical diversification in the past few years. In fact, what we found was that 19 of these 21 large AI data centers are in fact within a 50 to 65-kilometer radius from a big city or from a city of at least 100,000 people. In other words, not only are they still clustered close to cities, they're also the construction has progressed very quickly. On the right-hand side, we see the associated installed capacity from the constructed data centers, and we see that it has in fact tripled in as little as 18 months. In the last 18 months or so, this capacity has tripled, meaning that together, these data centers could consume more electricity than the towns next to which that they are located. And therefore, this adds to the challenge of why data centers are proving to be such a major challenge to the to regulators, to grid operators, to distribution companies, and so on. Now we talked about demand coming from these data centers and the clustering effects, but what does it mean for the supply of energy for data centers? We find that because data centers come up very quickly, they do require new generation to come online also very quickly, which is partly why renewables, led by solar, are a major part of the solution. And going forward, we find that renewables together are the single largest head of new generation coming online for data centers. These are not only in the form of any direct supply, but in fact a large portion of this is grid connected, meaning that this generation is going to the grid, and then data centers are of course consuming that electricity. But on the other hand, because these data centers come up very quickly and sometimes the grid connections are not available at the appropriate time, we find that natural gas turbine orders have really shot up. In fact, over the last 18 months, we have seen more gas turbine orders than we have in the last 20 years, meaning that gas has become a major supply option for data centers once again. And therefore, natural gas as a fuel is the single largest with which implies that over the next decade, all electricity generation from data centers, the emissions associated with it is on track to double. So emissions from electricity for data centers are on track to double over the next decade, which presents this industry as one that presents a sustainability challenge to the system as well. Now, before moving on to the next slide, I'd like to just broadly talk about what we were discussing so far. So we have framed all of these energy demand conversations as well as the supply of energy for data centers all under the broad bucket of energy for AI. Because here, this is where we really try to understand what the energy needs are, how do we supply for it, and therefore what the energy requirements for AI is. Over the next few slides, I'll be looking at what AI can do for the energy sector as a whole. So what is it about AI that can help the energy sector become more resilient, become more efficient, become more proactive, become more dynamic, and so on. And what are the benefits that the energy sector can accrue from AI? And here we did a global analysis of all the sectors and estimated that there is significant potential for efficiency gains as an example. So to give you maybe one or two illustrations of how that might happen, in the case of trucks, we find that large commercial freight companies are already using AI to optimize routes, under which the fleets of maybe hundreds or even thousands of trucks operate, and that optimization can lead to avoiding energy because it's basically made that route more efficient and therefore reduce the demand for energy. Similarly, we may have, in the case of aviation, for example, AI using live weather information to pick the best route to take advantage of any tailwinds or any other atmospheric characteristics that helps planes become more efficient. And together, when we put all these efficiency gains, we find that by 2035, the AI alone has a potential to save about 13 and a half exajoules of energy, which to compare with something that might be more familiar is the equivalent of Indonesia's annual energy consumption today. So an Indonesia worth of energy can be avoided just if AI was scaled up and these benefits were accrued from the system. One of the other things, I mean, this is obviously demand side, but even on the supply side and electricity generation side, we find that improved weather forecasting, improved hyperlocal weather forecasting can ensure that more solar and more wind is pumped into the grids, that curtailment is avoided, and therefore it can help make grids more sustainable, or rather reduce the carbon intensity of electricity generation. But having said that, it's not that obvious that these AI applications in the energy sector will actually be taken up. Here we try to understand what are the barriers that come in the way of the adoption of AI in the energy sector. And in the first category at the top, we find policy coverage. The policies tend to facilitate the entrance of new technologies or any other desirable changes to those sectors. And we find that, in fact, less than half of the global energy system either has open data policies that help AI companies train and optimize certain systems. In fact, if you look at something like building energy efficiency mandates, about 40% of all buildings are covered by such mandates, and therefore, without the presence of policies and such regulations that facilitate the use of AI, we might see that the uptake of AI is actually curtailed or constrained. Similarly, in the second category, we find that most energy demand equipment are not actually connected. They're not digitally connected. Less than half of the total residential heating and ventilation systems or gas meters or electric meters are actually connected to the internet. And without that digital connectivity, it'd be hard to imagine how AI can be expanded to span the scope of the global energy system. But this is where we find that policymakers and regulators have their task cut out. If we would like to use AI towards the benefit of the energy sector, these are the kind of barriers that will need to be overcome. Now, I talked so far of the applications of AI in the energy sector. But I'd like to use the last two slides to also talk about how Earth observation alongside artificial intelligence can help the energy sector understand a little bit more about the dynamic environment in which we operate. And here we'd like to give an example that of distributed solar electricity generation. So we see that on your screen right now, between the ASEAN countries and in Africa, there's been a surge of solar photovoltaic panel imports, and we find especially over the last 2-3 years, these imports have almost doubled or tripled in a very short period of time, which indicates that there's a big appetite for solar panels. Many of them these are not necessarily going towards large projects. They're actually going towards small distributed applications, such as those about a rooftop or maybe the use in farms and so on. As a result, just to take an example, this is Sri Lanka on the right-hand side. In 2024, you can see in the on the blue line, that's the electricity demand that is being met by the electrical utility over the over a particular 24-hour period in 2024, and we find that in 2026 that demand actually, or rather that supply from the utility has reduced, meaning that that gap is now being serviced, or that demand is being supplied by solar panels, likely on rooftops, on farms, in factories, and so on, which really goes to show the role of distributed solar technologies. But the main issue that we have is that it's hard for us to take the import data, which you see on the left-hand side, and to actually understand the deployment uh, in a particular geography, like you see on the right-hand side. So this is where we find that Earth observation and AI has a big role to play. And we'll give you the example now of Lahore in Pakistan. Pakistan, some of you may be aware, but it has had massive issues with energy security and with the stability of the grid over the past few years. Ever since we've had a lot of energy crises, we find in Pakistan that there could be uh, several hours of power outages every given day. Sometimes extending to 10 to 12 hours of power outages, which is quite critical, which is why households in Pakistan very broadly have adopted to solar technologies to help provide some stability to the electricity supply. And we see on the left-hand side, over time, when we tracked it through space, we find that in a particular neighborhood, the adoption of rooftop solar has spiked very quickly, and therefore between 24 and 2025, there's been about an eightfold growth in the solar capacity, and this we were able to estimate by the use of Earth observation with AI. We built a platform in house that helps us take images and convert those images into kilowatt or megawatt or gigawatt terms, and give us some useful insight. So for us, the power of Earth observation is not merely the photography of the Earth itself. It's what we see is obviously very interesting, but what's more interesting for us is what can we derive from that in terms of energy usage, in terms of energy supply, and in terms of the impacts on the environment, such as emissions. So I'll stop there. I think we have about 20 minutes for any discussion that we'd like to have on any of the topics that we mentioned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Siddharth and Thomas, for the very interesting presentation that's shedding light on an aspect of AI that we don't usually work with so much. So that's very enlightening. Yeah, does anyone have a question or a remark or something to discuss? Feel free to unmute yourself and take the word, or put the question in the chat, then we can read it. If not, in the meantime, I could ask a small question. In the beginning of or in the first part of the presentation, you mentioned that the use of data, the electricity use of data centers is very big and projected to be bigger, and at the same time they're being built more closer to existing cities compared to other industrial sites that have a heavy electricity usage. And that makes me think, of course, of these news stories that you read where a data center is being built and suddenly a local city doesn't have any water anymore, or has issues with maybe energy supply or water supply or other resource supply. And I don't know if these are kind of, well, it's already bad that this happens for some people, but I wonder if you have any insight into, like, is this expected at scale and more in the next years? I mean, not, of course, the fact that, like you've said, that we can expect more data centers, but are these going to give more and more problems for people that are living nearby? So of course also a policy issue, so it's not so easy to predict. Or are we dealing better with that in Europe, for example, than in the United States? Or are there going to be some regulations about that? Or
Yeah. So basically what we are talking about here is competition for scarce resources, whether that resource be water or whether it be space in the electricity network near to where the data center wants to locate and where the city is located. I mean, you can think of a theoretical case, which is actually not so theoretical because it happens every day, where electricity network operator is faced with two connection requests. Maybe one, this is a kind of extreme example, but maybe one for a hospital and one for a data center. That happens. Our electricity system operators are faced with multiple connection requests from multiple users, and there is a very long queue for getting those connections. So policymakers are faced with a choice of who to prioritize and with what rules and conditions. Typically, what has been used is non-discriminatory first come, first served. But this creates a perverse incentive to put in as many applications as you can in order to get hopefully one of those approved somewhere in the area that you're interested in serving. And so what we see is, yes, absolutely, there are speculative, duplicative applications for data centers which are creating congestion in this connection queue process as well, because all of those applications need to be processed by the regulator, need to be approved or denied, and so on. So many policymakers are looking at alternative approaches to things like, first come, first ready. They're looking at things like auctions for capacity, at more stringent down payment requirements to make sure that you cut speculative applications, but also at things like priority lists and priority sectors. So policymakers may issue a regulation saying we will prioritize these kind of applications over these kind of applications because we just don't have enough space in the network for everybody at this point. But yeah, it's happening very much so. I would just say that, data centers are one part of the story, but we also see, connection queues for solar PV projects, for battery storage projects. Anytime anything wants to connect to the network, regardless of whether it is a demand project or a supply project, extensive studies need to be done on what that project implies for power flows across the network, because both demand and supply projects change the power flow across the network. You need to see whether you can accommodate that, and then go through the the connection process to get the project built. So this is not just about data centers, it is about our networks facing, our networks and regulators facing challenges of just the growth of project numbers that are looking to get connected.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you for the answer. We have a question in the chat by Antonella. So she says, thank you for the presentation. We often talk about AI and Earth observation for solar panels, but looking at the bigger picture, with climate change increasing the frequency of extreme weather events, how is the International Energy Association incorporating incorporating AI and satellite-driven predictive maintenance into its guidelines for energy security? Did you get the question, or should I repeat?
Yes, no, that's good. We can take that question. So, firstly, just to say that a large part of our mandate continues to be energy security. We try to understand how the big changes that are happening in the world affect the affordability of energy, the supply of energy, securely to all the consumers who may need it. And of course, we also have an additional mandate to track and understand its implications on the environment, notably on emissions and therefore climate change. Now, traditionally, organizations such as ours have used reported data to understand how the energy system and its contours are. We have a set of member governments that kind of provide that data to us. We also purchase data externally, but as we are now realizing, that's obviously not enough. This is where the role of Earth observation really comes in. We are able to, like I gave an example of the solar situation, but we try to use any additional data to kind of augment and help understand better the implications of our choices on energy security, on climate, and so on. Now, predictive maintenance and the role of AI becomes quite critical. We are doing early analysis on it. We don't yet. I mean, the way our pass-through to policy recommendations work is that we work with our member governments to highlight an issue, to quantify it, and then to think of the best ways in which that might find a home in the respective strategies of the various governments. Um, we have flagged the role of AI in predictive maintenance, and also in general, we try to highlight the role of Earth observation to give us new data. Um, but I mean, yeah, just to say that it's important, but we don't really at the moment. I think it's too early. We don't really have something concrete to tell our governments on this front just yet, except that it's very important.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have another question from the audience? Maybe a more, say, open question, but you gave about where you think that AI could have an impact. You gave the concrete example of solar panels and better, well, accounting, I guess, or estimation or forecasting of energy by solar panels. You also gave some indications about sectors that could benefit or whose energy usage could be optimized by the use of AI. But since we are, or many of us are in an AI-focused research lab working with Earth observation data, do you have any concrete ideas for other application cases where, like, problem settings or tasks that we could try to solve with Earth observation data and AI that would benefit one of the sectors that you gave an overview of? Or did you run into any ideas for specific use cases recently?
So I think, asset identification is definitely one. Solar panels is within that field the sort of standout case because it's becoming system relevant, as Sid showed in the case of Sri Lanka. Maybe a quarter or a third of demand just disappeared in the space of 2 years for the utility, but obviously it didn't go nowhere. It just shifted off the grid. So it's very system relevant. There are other examples of, in places where official data is not so good, things like mini grids in Africa to understand communities that are being connected to modern forms of energy, not to a central system, but via mini grids and off-grid solutions. Things like fuel storage. In Africa, we're trying to track things like LPG storage, which can give you a sense of how much stocks different countries have of LPG, which is used for cooking. We used Earth observation a lot in the context of the energy crisis that was, triggered by the war in the Middle East, to try and understand damage to energy assets and how quickly it would take to repair them, and how significant the impact on energy supply would be. So we used Earth observation to look at damage to liquefied natural gas facilities, oil fields, and so on. So that's another area. Even characterizing the electricity network. In many places, we don't have good network data. So if we want to build models of the electricity system, getting access to electricity network data is sometimes quite difficult in a country where it's not well processed and well stored by public data providers. So we use things like OpenStreetMaps, which has a data set on electricity networks. But again, improving that would be very interesting. I think
for example, sorry to interrupt you, but for example, that could consist of the identification of electricity relevant infrastructure from satellite images.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. You could think of building a model that can identify from verified network images, and then try to expand that to regions where there's not good network data to try and find the assets, for example. Even things like resource characterization, using satellite imagery and AI processing for trying to characterize subsoil resources. There's a few mining companies that are looking for critical mineral deposits, things like lithium and so on, where some of the early resource characterization can be done from Earth observation. Many applications like that. I think what is mentioned in the chat is also very interesting. The combination of granular forecasts for weather events and detailed analysis of the on-the-ground assets can, I think, be quite interesting from a resilience to climate shocks perspective. As we get more solar PV, for example, one of the challenges that Sid mentioned, which is really going to become system relevant and significant, is hyperlocal forecasts. If you have a cloud that is big enough to cross, an amount of solar panels in Spain that is system relevant, it would be great to be able to forecast that. So these kind of downscaling weather forecasts very dynamically and matching it with on the ground assets to see what the implications could be would be very useful as well.
Okay. That's a long list of potential future projects. Thank you for that. That is some interesting inspiration. We have another.
There is another question in the chat. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. So by Anand, who asks, do you always rely on internal teams to work with Earth observation, or do you have external partners?
So. The IEA is a very small place. We have about 300 research staff, so it's really not a big organization, a very small budget. So, as an international organization, we don't really make external grants. Sometimes we, do procure intellectual services from third parties, but it's not very common. So this means that we try and do as much as we can in-house or partner with another institution where there's kind of a mutual interest. But it's also the case that, we can't invest in having a 10-person Earth observation and AI team because it's not that, often used in our day-to-day work. We maybe have one or two people with skills across the agency. And then, of course, people who are amateurs, using GIS data and so on. But it's something we invest a lot in, but within the scope of our resources.
Well, if I can add to that, there are some, pretty interesting examples in the past where we may have partnered with a niche institution or company that's able to provide a data set through Earth observation, of course, that might be very relevant to an upcoming analysis. So, often our big constraint is that as a international organization. We don't often procure small data sets and so on. But if there's a niche and interesting application, we can always partner for the sake of that. Usually, the partner organization is happy with the visibility and the fact that that analysis may reach a decision maker. And in often case, like very often, our data requirements are very aggregate in nature. So we don't really require very project specific granular data that we'll publish. What we publish is very aggregate and kind of policy relevant. So if you have any ideas, including from your respective institutions, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to find an opportunity where any such interesting data sets could be used.
Great. And do you have an ongoing partnership or plans for a future partnership with ESA? Well, could be with Phi-Lab or other people in ESA to provide some of that connection with Earth observation and energy.
Yeah. In fact, we have an ongoing discussion with ESA, and in the past, of course, with Kontan, we benefited a lot from his expertise. But through him and in general through the relationship we have built, we'd love to kind of ensure that we are able to tap on your expertise and learn something from you, and likewise be hopefully useful to you in some ways.
Okay, thank you. And then there's maybe one last question in the chat by sign up. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. When mapping and tracking data centers, what attributes are important beyond the footprint and maybe the capacity?
Quite a few aspects. The cooling technology is interesting. We're seeing a move to closed cycle immersion cooling, which has a lower water footprint than traditional evaporative cooling. The power technology on the data center, we're seeing an increasing use of on-site power assets, mostly natural gas in the United States. So understanding, is the data center being built to be connected to the grid? Is it being built to connect to, to be powered by on-site power? That's an interesting question. It's probably not possible to track this from space, but this distinction between an AI-focused data center and a conventional data center is quite important because, as I mentioned, they have very different power characteristics. I really don't know, but maybe it's something that you could look at sort of by trying to look at the thermal footprint per unit of space, because ultimately AI-focused data centers are much, much more dense in power. So that would translate to a larger thermal footprint per unit of space. But yeah, quite a few characteristics like that.
Okay, I hope that clarifies. Unless we have another question, I think we can wrap up, kind of. So I want to thank you again, Sid and Thomas, for the very nice presentation. It's very cool to have people from different organizations, different agencies, shed light on things from a different angle. So thank you for that. Thank you also for everyone online for attending. Thank you, Cristiano, for organizing. And then we'll see everyone for the next Phi Talk, and we hope to be in touch, Sid and Thomas, later. Have a nice afternoon, everyone.
Thank you again to everybody, and see you next week for the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.